special full week of Numisma Talks for National Coin Week. Every second and fourth Thursday of the month at noon Mountain is our regularly scheduled Numisma Talks. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your question. Your question will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Eric Karell. Dr. Karell is a lifelong collector of paper money, coins, and stamps. He is a veteran of the submarine force and now a retired nuclear chemical engineer for the US Naval Nuclear Program. In his free time, he is an amateur artist and has devoted time to practicing the art of engraving, letterpress, printing, and painting. He loves to be able to say that he studied under Christopher Madden, chief engraver of the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, even if it was only for 1 week at the ANA Summer Seminar Series. Dr. Karell has been a prior Sundman lecturer, presenting a talk entitled The Masterpiece in Your Wallet, Paper Money is Art. Eric will be presenting Populist Art, the fight over the soul of money in America as reflected in art from 1870 to 1900s. And is that your painting in back behind you?
Actually, it is. It's something I pulled out after I started working on this talk. I hadn't worked on it for like 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Been trying to get over a hump here to figure out what to do with it.
Gotcha. Well, it looks lovely from my view. So it is all yours, Eric. If you want to share your screen and get started, you're ready to go.
Slideshow, play from start. Okay, how's that?
That's perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me here this afternoon to talk about two of my favorite subjects. That's paper money and art. From somewhere, there's a saying that when artists get together, they talk about money. And when people with money get together, they talk about art. And I think that this little quip is actually apropos to our discussion today as we talk about what made American artists starting in the 1870s pick paper money as a topic. We'll look at some of their works in a little bit of detail, and then finally talk about what ended that trend at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, so with that, let's get started. This whole business started with an artist named William Harnett, and we'll talk about him in a little bit more detail later. He painted this painting, $5 bill, in 1877. It falls under the category of a still life. But what makes it unusual is, first of all, its subject matter, with paper money, the fact that it's there on its own, and the fact that after this painting was painted, many other artists in the United States took up the same theme and developed it in different ways. Let's look a little bit more closely at Harnett's work here. At the top, we have the paper money on which it was based. A $5 bill. It's called, by collectors, it's called the woodchopper note, because if you look at the center vignette, you have the pioneer family, and the father of the family is holding an axe. Below, we have Harnett's version of it, or interpretation of it, in a little bit more close up. You see that Harnett didn't try to microscopically repeat all of the details, but he picked a subject or an example that had a lot of wear and a certain surface patina that gave this a more artistic or painterly feel. Now, when we say still life, at least to me, I don't know about you, but to me, it conjures up an image like this. This is by James Peale. It's called Still Life, Pears, Peaches, and Grapes, painted in 1824. Now, actually, this painting could have been painted anywhere from 1600 to, say, 1901 at the end of the Victorian era. But there's something about another term I need to introduce you to that is concerned with paintings like this, and that's the French term called trompe l'oeil, or in English, it's to fool or to trick the eye. So a still life painter whatever his period of time, has to decide how much of the trickery or how much does he really want to make his or her painting look like the actual subject as opposed to being an interpretation of that. Okay. At the still life painting is, I want to say, kind of the red-haired stepchild of the fine arts universe. At the opposite extreme of the still life or the trompe l'oeil type of painting, we have the expressionist painting. This is by Albert Ryder, also an American artist, Moonlight Marine. And here we have, we can see it's a sailing ship in a moonlit sea, but there's no detail. We know it. He's presented us enough information to understand what the subject is, but that's it. He's trying to express an emotion or a feeling. In fact, if we read what he says about this, the difference between still life and expressionism, we have here, the artist should fear to become the slave of detail. He should strive to express his thought and not the surface of it. So there's a tension in the art critic world between people like Ryder's work and those people who are trying to express an image in exacting detail. Now, paper money being flat doesn't really lend itself well to the standard still life setting, which is items arranged on a shelf or on a table. Harnett tried that in 1878, a year after his first painting. The overall painting is good, but the depictions of the paper money now become only secondary or tertiary to the overall painting itself. Now, that it's not that there's no place for paper money in the still life genre. This painting by Samuel Lewis, called A Deception, from 1780, a full 100 years before Harnett's $5 note, is what's called a rack painting. It depicts basically a bulletin board with different flat objects arranged in it. And this image or this genre of still life we'll see this throughout our presentation. And in fact, if you look closely, I'll show you in detail if you didn't figure it out. The paper money in this painting is a £10 note from the Bank of England. There it is. Oh, wait. The other thing is that while, like in this example, there was a paper money in the painting, paper money paintings before Harnett's time, that the time we're talking about, are rare. So why now? What started all this? Well, for one, money in all its various social manifestations was a very hot topic in the period that we're talking about, 1870 to 1900. Why? Well, because that's the Gilded Age. It's the age of conspicuous consumption, the Go West Young Man motto, the rags to riches story, and the idea that you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There was while there was old money and wealth, there was also an optimism and a feeling that, hey, with the proper pluck and luck, you yourself, no matter what your origin was, could get yourself money. Now, on the flip side of that, beneath the gilding was some trouble. Also during this period, the U.S. went through labor disputes, notably the Homestead Strike in 1892, the Pullman Strike in 1894, financial scandals, these stock swindles, trusts, monopolies. Often these were associated with the railroads, distrust and dislike of Wall Street, and the silver controversy that culminated in the election of 1896. Now, the first three of these we're familiar with today. We have our own labor disputes. We know what financial scandals are, and we all, I think, have some distrust and dislike of Wall Street. But the labor disputes back then involved physical violence, the calling in of federal or state troops. And so it was a different different time. Now, of the three, the last one though, we don't have a connection to, but nevertheless, it's important because it provides the background to some of our subject material. And well, yes, that's what it does. It provides background for some of our subject material. Okay. So, what is the silver controversy? Well, I'm afraid I have to go back sometime. I don't know the audience here, how much familiarity you have with this issue, so I'll try to make it brief. From the beginning of the Republic, a dollar was defined in two ways. It was defined as a certain amount of gold, certain weight of gold, and a certain weight of silver. So there were two different definitions. Now, for many years from the beginning of the Republic, it turned out that the amount of silver defined as a silver dollar was worth more than a dollar. So there was no incentive for people to bring raw silver to the mint and have it coined into dollar coins, nor was there any incentive for the mint to buy silver on the open market and turn it into dollar coins that would cost them more to mint than they were worth. So this fact was finally recognized in 1873 when the law was passed directing the mint to cease minting silver dollars and also to cease accepting silver from private individuals for coinage into silver. So that effectively knocked silver out of the circulating medium and left gold as the standard of value, or the standard value nominally and in practice. Well, what happened? Well, somewhere along the line between the founding of the Republic and 1873, the Civil War happened. And that introduced another nominal standard of value, basically the greenback. Both North and South found it impossible to pay for the cost of the war in terms of hard currency or loans or taxes. So what happened was they resorted to paper money. In the North, the initial paper money to pay for this was authorized by Congress, and the amount that could be issued was also set by Congress. So if the Treasury came to Congress and said, hey, we need another $5 million of greenbacks, it was up to Congress to either issue it or not. Well, they defaulted to always allowing that to be issued. The paper money was called a greenback because the back of the notes was printed in green. Now, this was actually an anti-counterfeiting device. I'm not going to get into that's a different lecture. But the fighting words on the back here are right in the middle. This note is a legal tender for all debts, public and private. And then there's some exceptions, blah, 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 legalese. But the fighting words were that now anyone who had these greenbacks could pay off old debts that had been incurred in silver or gold with this paper currency. And the paper currency was not backed by silver or gold, but only by the ability or the will of Congress to regulate its issue. Later on, it changed, but I don't want to get into all that right now. Now, so also during this period, there was a fight between the West, the South, and the East in terms of monetary policy. The South and the West farmers, basically the farmers in the Midwest who were just opening up the prairie, wanted cheap money. They wanted low interest rates. They wanted the available credit because they had mortgages to pay off, and they wanted the price of their agricultural goods to always go up. So they wanted to inflate the currency. The people in the East who had money, they didn't want that to happen because they wanted to hold on to the value of their money. So the greenbacks became a source of monetary policy contention. But the people of the South and the West were not able to force Congress to increase the amount of greenbacks. The amount of greenbacks was finally capped at 350 million after the Civil War, and it was politically impossible to change that. But something happened that gave the inflationists a back door, and that was that the price of silver dropped. Part of that was due to the opening up of silver deposits in the in the West, and there are other reasons. I don't want to, again, I don't, this is not that lecture. So suffice it to say that now the price of silver in a silver dollar by as legislated was less than $1. So now the silver miners and the proponents of inflation of currency came in and said, hey, we want you, the mint, to start minting silver dollars. Well, they were blocked by that law that had been passed in 1873 that stopped that. Well, this led to a huge fight. Anyway, there was a compromise, and in 1878, the Treasury was forced or decreed by Congress to start buying silver bullion and minting it into silver dollars. And here we have the result, which is the Morgan dollar, a beautifully worn example here. But that didn't provide the price inflation that people were looking for, at least the people in the South and West, and for a number of reasons. But one of them was that cowboys maybe wanted to carry around silver dollars so that they could throw them on the saloon top bar table. But the people in the East certainly didn't want to carry around silver dollars to pay for day-to-day expenses. Just like you and I don't want to carry around pockets filled with quarters to pay for stuff. Eventually, that was only part of the reason. If you're, I don't know your background, but I'm making some broad generalizations here. Congress solved that problem in 1886 by authorizing paper money in low denominations to represent the silver dollars that had been building up in the Treasury's vaults, and they were just sitting there. So here's a beautiful example of a $1 silver. They were called silver certificates, and this has Martha Washington on it. I would note of interest is that this is the only U.S. paper currency that features an actual identifiable woman on it. So, and we'll see this again throughout this discussion. Anyhow, so then we end up with two new currencies. We end up with silver certificates and greenbacks. And as soon as you start circulating paper money around, you're also going to get counterfeits. This is a $10 greenback. That's a counterfeit. It's hard to read, but those diagonal stampings across a counterfeit. The miserable condition of this note reflects actually a fact that there was not enough circulating currency around to meet demand. So the paper money it's kind of like if the ATMs restricted, you'd only take out $20 a week. So paper money that was already in existence and circulating stayed in circulation. So after a time, it became miserably worn out, and it was difficult to tell whether it was a counterfeit or not. And there was no incentive, for people to bring it into the bank, because at the best you could get a brand new note, but at the opposite way, the bank would confiscate and say, "Hey, this is a fake. We're going to keep it." Okay, so we talked about the first issue. Why now? Why did paper money become a subject matter? The second reason is, in my opinion, is that the artistic standard of U.S. paper money improved during the post-Civil War period, particularly in regard to portraiture, making banknotes more appealing to artists as a subject. We already saw the Martha Washington example. Here on the left, we have Abraham Lincoln. This is from a $100 Treasury note from a portrait from the Matthew Brady studio taken in 1864. This is Samuel Dexter from a 50-cent fractional currency note. And this is Admiral Farragut from a $100 Treasury note. So the standard of portraiture is very high. And if you look at the history, this standard is maintained only by the American Banknote Company throughout the early parts of the 20th century, and later by the Czech Republic banknotes in the 20th century. Czech Republic held a very high standard also. Okay, that's two reasons. Finally, the third, during this period, the still life genre was represented by talented artists who picked commercially lucrative subjects. To varying degrees, they espoused the trompe l'oeil standard that the critics otherwise disparaged. So now we'll turn back to our original artist, William Harnett. He was active from 1875 to about 1890. As a young man, he was apprenticed as an engraver to silversmiths, so he was responsible for engraving those engraved initials or inscriptions that you see on those things. But he also had formal training. He trained at the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts at 19 as an evening student. And at this time, if you were in the United States and you wanted formal training in arts, you either went to Philadelphia or you went to New York, or you went overseas. Now, Harnett also went overseas. He went to Munich, Germany, which at the time when he went was the place to go because they had a museum there that was open to the public that had a wide collection of old masters. Later on, the place to go would be Paris. At any rate, he went there, he came back, and he exhibited at the Academy of Design. His first exhibit was in New York in 1875. So Harnett reinvigorated the still life genre through both his technical skill and his choice of subject matter. His most famous painting is this one, After the Hunt, painted in 1883, although he painted a number of variations on this theme. The Trophy of the Hunt, 1885. This one is here in Pittsburgh. And The Old Violin, painted in 1886, and that's at the National Gallery. Again, he also painted, he didn't just stop, I'll call him a real artist. When a real artist finds a topic or a theme that sells, he keeps moving on them and you'll see variations on them. Either the subject matter will change or the arrangement will change, same subject matter, but that's what you get. Now, what made Harnett's paintings successful was they were appealed to men, and they appealed to men with money. So they ended up in places like saloons. And when I say saloon here, don't get the wrong idea. It's not a couple of 2x4s put across a couple of sawhorses like you might see in some Western movie. These were elaborately decorated, very ornate places of business, either places of business or a saloon. Saloons were often men only, although they might have had a ladies' night or so. So when displayed in places like this, the accuracy and the trompe l'oeil, the fooling of the eye, became an asset and not a liability. So people would come in just to see those paintings to see if they could, because word would get around it. Hey, I couldn't tell whether it was a real rabbit hanging up there or so. This was good for business, and for people with the money as an object, it helped. Hey, this is a place that has money. Okay. Now, Harnett didn't do much more with money painting. There's a number of his works that are recorded, but they're lost. We don't know what happened to them. Another one that is in existence we can show you is that this one here, Shin Plaster with Exhibition Label from 1879. A shin plaster. Let me just show you what the model was. I mean, obviously this wasn't the real model, but I found one that had about the same miserable condition that the one that Harnett displayed or painted. A shin plaster is a derogatory a slang term for fractional currency, either of government issue or private issue. These were small scale banknotes or script notes for amounts less than $1. This one's for 10 cents. Shin plasters is another word we would call it a bandage. Um, so he hasn't picked a pristine example. He's made a painterly uh, interpretation of the shinplast or the 10-cent note. Below it is what appears to be a newspaper clipping cut out of a newspaper. But if you look closely at 3 feet, you would say, hey, it's a newspaper clipping. But if you look closely at it, you can't read any of the words. And the lower left-hand corner is the number 37. That was supposedly the number of this painting in this exhibition. But when the people setting up the exhibition tried to take that off because thinking that that's just a pasted on label, they found that it was actually part of the painting. Okay. So, oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up a second. Now I said Harnett stopped painting paper money. That's true. He actually stopped around 1886 when he was visited by the Secret Service, who confiscated one of his money paintings and basically put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Hey, if you know what's good for you, you probably should stop doing this." Now he got his painting back eventually, but he also did stop painting money paintings after that. Now he was followed up. His mantle, Harnett's mantle, was taken up by another artist named John Haber. He was active between 1880 and 1900. He started life as an apprentice to a lithographer, and he also studied at the National Academy of Design in New York, as did Harnett. So right away, we recognize two similarities between these artists. Harnett had a detailed oriented job as a silver engraver, and Haberly also, by the business, you would also have to be detail oriented to be a lithography is a printing mechanism. Again, we don't have time to get into it too, but anyway, if you were doing that, you'd be touching up text or drawings or something that's going to be printed, and it would involve detail. So let's see, this is his self-portrait, 1882. And by the very nature of this self-portrait and the title, that's me, you know that we're dealing with someone with a, I don't know, we could say interesting personality. And we'll see that in his work. So here's one of his paintings titled Reproduction from 1887. It's a $10 silver certificate from the first series of silver certificates. Remember, I said that the low denomination, the small change, wasn't available until 1886. So $10 represented a considerable sum of money back then. Haberly's Haberly's also not picked a pristine example of the banknote to paint, but he's done a good job or he's more detailed than Harnett would have been. But he's exhibited the folds at the top, a nice job doing the portrait. So from 3 feet, it looks like an engraved example of a banknote stuck to this board. He's also got a couple of postage stamps underneath there. And then at the bottom left-hand corner, we have also the newspaper clippings and a small tintype, which is Haberly, a photograph, or meant to be a photograph of Haberly. Remember, all of this is painted. None of this stuff has been stuck to the thing, like a collage. I should mention that Haberly exhibited this at the Art Institute of Chicago at their first annual exhibition, and he sold it for $350. Now you say, well, how much is $350 in today's money? That's a hard question to answer because a lot of factors go into that. My thumb rule is it would be by 15 of today's, or a dollar back then would be either 15 to $20 of today's money, give or take 10 times. Again, that's a different lecture. Okay, so let's look at what Haberly's newspaper clippings consist of. And Haberly's a different guy. Harnett stopped painting after the Secret Service started to lean on him. Haberle's like the opposite. He kind of likes poking the bear, so to speak. So let's see what he writes here. On the left-hand side, you see the clipping, and at the top it says it is done entirely with a brush. Okay, then John Haberle, the counterfeiter in New Haven, he lived in New Haven. He deceives the eye into belief that, etc., etc. So there's a picture of him by lamplight, I guess, engraving a steel plate with his counterfeit, and above him is a knife and a pistol hanging up. Then the other clipping is a counterfeit, a remarkable painting of a $10 United States bill, and part of it is covered by the tintype, but would humbug Barnum. Now, what he's referring to there is Barnum and Bailey's Circus, which would have in its repertoire of exhibits things like the two-headed woman and the mermaid, dried mermaid, stuff like this that most people really didn't believe to be real, but would want to go see anyway. Okay, so let's look at another example of Haberle's work. Here is the painting's called USA. At the top, we have a US $1 greenback, which is superimposed on a fragmentary $10 greenback. I'll show you the actual $1 bill that he was painting is this. This is a successor to the first greenback that I showed you. The name USA comes from the US of A or United States of America at the very center of the note. Although the art critic would say that Haberle possibly titled this work after the sorry state of the country at the time, represented by the tattered and worn out bill. Now, I don't know that we have to believe that. That's the kind of thing that academicians are paid to write. But at any rate, that's the title when it was exhibited. We also have there's two things. There's this postage stamp again at the upper right. There's no deep meaning to that postage stamp, but it does allow Haberle to introduce a note of color into the painting, or a highlight of color. Ordinarily, of course, greenbacks have a greenback. The fronts are gray, and if nothing else, or if anything else, they'll have that muted red seal, treasury seal. All right, so in this case, we have the little newspaper clipping, and in this case, he has imitation number. It's been scratched out. It was meant to be the number in some exhibit by John Haberle. Is one of those clever pieces of artistic mechanistic or mechanism. Haberle used a kind of a code word for trompe-l'oeil. He called it artistic mechanics, showing an old greenback and other, etc., etc. So Haberle is self-referential in his work. So imitation was a previous work. This in the USA, he references that previous work, and in self-congratulatory terms. Again, he kind of makes the point right up front that about counterfeiting. On the right, we have the actual anti-counterfeiting warning that's on the back of the note. And on the left, we have Haberle's depiction of it, and it's word for word and letter for letter. So if he used a brush, it was a very small brush. Okay. Oh, there's a story associated with this. It's also known as the Chicago Bill picture, because when it was exhibited in Chicago, a critic came up to it and wrote a review that was scathing. He said, "A fraud has been perpetrated onto the public. The Haberle painting of banknotes is nothing more than two tattered notes pasted to the board and then painted over to make it look like it was a painting." And he goes on to say that he had lifted the corner of one of the banknotes to prove it. Now, when the exhibit staff contacted Haberle and told him about this, he came back all the way from New Haven to Chicago and orchestrated a test. Basically, they would take some solvent and remove a corner of the painted image to prove that it was actually a painted image and not just a collage And so they did. This experiment was successful, and the offending critic had to publish and did publish a retraction in his newspaper, which of course made Haberle happy and gave him a lot of publicity. This is the last work we're going to talk about from Haberle. Haberle did he had a lot of he painted a lot of pictures. Not all of them had money in them, but so this is the last one we'll talk about, and it's his most complicated work. This is The Changes of Time, painted in 1888. Again, we have to understand that everything in this image has been painted on canvas. So he's going through on the frame, he's got medallions of all the presidents from George Washington up at the upper center top, up through Benjamin Harrison, who was inaugurated when this painting was painted. And then we've got kind of a history of paper currency from the beginning of the country. At the top, we have a Connecticut banknote, ostensibly from 1774. Recall that before the Continental Congress, the individual colonies issued their own paper money. Then at the right, at the bottom of the pile, there's a $1 Confederate States note. Just in the center, we have a $50 Confederate States note portraying Jeff Davis. We've got 2 fractional currency notes, and then at the contemporary $5 silver certificate. So Haberle, again, he uses a lot of detail. Again, from 3 foot, this looks like a engraved banknote pasted onto this board. He's got his collection of postage stamps to anchor one of the corners. At the other corner, the lower right, we have an envelope and his signature tintype. And balancing that up at the upper left-hand corner is a unknown female with a soulful look on her eyes. This is the type of thing that would be given away in cigarette containers, or kind of like baseball cards would be. Oh, let's see. What did he get for this? He sold this piece for $1,300. So a considerable sum of money. Now, I'm going to go take a little curveball here. We've seen that between Harnett and Haberle, there's a difference in the amount of detail used to portray the banknotes. Harnett was not so much, Haberle was more, but the guy who really brought this to its final conclusion was a man named Emanuel Ninger, also known as Joseph Gilbert, also known by the popular press as Jim the Penman. And he was active. It's not quite clear when he was active. It was somewhere between 1880 and his career ended in 1896, for reasons that I'll tell you in a second. Now, Ninger he had a different view of marketing. He skipped the middleman altogether. He didn't go through a dealer. He didn't exhibit his work, but he offered it directly to the public at face value. Now, if I'm kind of pulling your leg here a little bit. Ninger was a counterfeiter who drew his banknotes, his counterfeits, using pen and ink. And his career ended but in 1896 when he was arrested for attempting to pass one of his counterfeits. Here's an example. This is held at the Smithsonian Institute. He did $100 bills, he did $50 bills, and he did $20 bills. These kind of started to appear they were normally stopped at the sub-treasury offices where they were in New York, where they were recognized as counterfeits. And they were kind of intermittent throughout that period. Anyway, this is a $100 bill that he drew by hand. This is the actual note that he was attempting to reproduce. And the story goes that he was finally caught when he was trying to pass a banknote, and the clerk had wet fingers and the ink smudged, and she notified police. Well, there's 2 versions of the story. One was that it was a woman. One was that he had put the banknote on a bar counter and it got wet. and that he was, at any rate, he was arrested and he served 4 years for attempting to pass counterfeit notes. Now, in the odd way that we have, if a guy writes a bad check or signs or forges a signature on a bad check, the guy's a bum. But Ninja, because he passed his own work, was kind of a folk hero. We have this odd way in our society that, again, like I said, if a guy forges a check, he's a bum. But if he forges a Rembrandt and is successful in selling it at a high-end auction house, he's kind of a folk hero. Well, the same thing happened with Ninja. At any rate, he served 4 years and disappears from view. Now let's do a quick, a little bit more detail, see what his technique was. On the left, we have the actual banknote. This is that engraving that you saw earlier of Lincoln. And when the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, who made the plates for this, took the photograph, they had to convert it into an engraving. And when you do that, you have to render the image in a series of lines or dots of various sizes or thicknesses. Now, Ninja did just that. He used his pen and attempted to copy, not necessarily every single line, but that's the way he rendered the image in terms of lines and dots. I think quite successfully here. Now, when I read about this, let me go back a second. I've always been ever since I was a teenager and I'd gone to the Smithsonian to see this and saw these notes there in the exhibit, I was fascinated by this. And as preparing for this talk, I thought, well, I'm going to try to see if this is even possible. Well, obviously it's possible, but what went into it based on the contemporary descriptions of what Ninja's technique was. Okay, so I started that. And there I am on the left with my model and my at some stage of this work. That's what I was doing. On the right is my set of tools, and further along, let's see. Oops, sorry. Okay, so after 6 weeks of work, the result is at the top, and my model, which is a plate proof of the $100 note. To actually buy that $100 note today would be a 5-figure investment. So, okay, sorry, I'm not there. Instead, I spent $20 on eBay for the plate proof, which is actually taken from the actual plate. At any rate, I quickly found I couldn't follow the Ninja method, which was described by contemporary literature as being tracing the actual note. I ended up doing it freehand, although I'm not sure that freehand is the right term for meticulously measuring the location of these, all the inscriptions and the position of the drawings. At any rate, there it is. Is it worth the trouble? Well, okay, what lessons learned? First of all, a lesson learned is that the engravers of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing must have been fantastically skilled men, because it's extremely difficult. I could not. I stopped very quickly trying to use Ninja's method. I ended up using what Haberle or Harnett would use, would be shading in using just shading in the areas for light and dark. The other thing I gave up pretty quickly was trying to find the right paper to use. But anyway, that's a different lecture. I'm thinking about making that a different lecture. Okay, so would it pass muster in a dark bar? Maybe, but I'm not sure I was going to take the chance. Okay. The next guy we're going to talk about is Victor Dubreuil. Now, he's an interesting guy, and very much less is known about him than the other artists that we've talked about. And much of what the old literature will say is one thing, but there's a fairly recent article based on a recently discovered contemporary newspaper interview that changes a lot of what the conventional wisdom is. Okay, anyway, he came to the United States from France, I think in 1883, under some cloud of scandal. Apparently he had been accused of embezzling money. So he comes to the States, works as a stable boy for a while, teaches himself painting, and in the 1883 he's naturalized and lists himself as an artist. This is not a self-portrait. This is a portion of another painting that we'll see by him where he has used himself as the model. Now you can see right away that well, not right away. In the beginning, he's right on the conventional rails following after Haberle and Harnett. Here's his version of that $5 bill. But the next painting I'm going to show you is a very different painting, and I think ranks up there as, if not the best depiction of currency in this time period that we've seen. But before we do that, I want to give the background for that painting so we can better understand where it comes from. Remember I said that there was this scheme by people who wanted to lower the value of the dollar so that prices would go up. That would help farmers who had fixed mortgages. If they could get more money for their goods, that would help them. And the scheme was to convert silver bullion into silver dollars at a fixed ratio. Now, this scheme went on in various forms throughout the period we're talking about, and it ended up in causing a financial panic and an economic downturn in 1893. And again, that's a different lecture as to why that happened, but the downturn was so severe that this question about the question of what role would silver play in economic or monetary policy came front and center into the election of 1896. And that was the election between McKinley and William Jennings Bryan. Or in the shorthand of the day, it was the gold bugs versus the silver bugs. And you can see that on the right, we have the silver bugs campaign button, 16-1, no compromise. And at the right, or I'm sorry, at the left, we have McKinley's image on a gold bug. Now, Victor de Broglie interpreted these events in this painting, The Cross of Gold, which I think, again, in my opinion, comes the closest to bridging the gap between a trompe l'oeil still life of paper money and a fine arts representation of an ideal or a concept. And the concept here is in this quote from William Jennings Bryan at the Democratic National Convention, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Bryan was an outstanding orator, and this was his signature speech. Again, the crown of thorns here is a gold standard, hard money approach to monetary policy, again, based on the gold standard. So in his painting, he has used the artist's favorite, the Martha Washington silver certificate, and behind that there's a couple of greenbacks, and to add some to balance the color, at the bottom there's a $10. This is a national banknote. I don't want to get into the technicalities here, but those of you who know about this would criticize me if I said, well, it's greenbacks and silver certificates. Anyhow, in the balance of colors and in the way that the notes are arranged, it's a outstanding piece of work. De Broglie also painted a number of paintings along these lines, barrels of money. This is money to burn. He also did again, once a theme is found to be successful by an artist, he or she will rearrange them or make different adaptations on that theme. These, again, if you're looking for a social commentary here, that there are people who, for them, these barrels filled with money would be not much account. Another one, this is safe money. This is a poke at the railroads. It depicts a safe stuffed with packets of money. Again, in this case, if you look at them from 10 feet, they look real. But if you look at them closely, you'll find that the denominations are incorrect for the banknotes themselves. So, oh, and then okay, so at the top shelf we have stacks of gold coins, and in the center, that yellow sticky there, if you read it, it says receipts. It's got an amount, expenses, another amount, and then the difference is the profit. The profit is then divvied up in terms of US and banknotes and gold and silver. So the net profit is 492,392,296 and 50 cents. So the commentary, I guess, is both in the filling of the safe, but also you have to look at the top, the NSE and WRR, that stands for North, South, East, and West Railroad, and the dividend safe. Now, this is one of his plays on words, I guess, can be taken either way. That, hey, this is the safe in which the dividends are kept, or the shady practices of the railroad, whether in stock manipulation or in manipulation of freight rates through the collusion with other railroads, means that the dividends from this railroad, your investment in this railroad, is safe. The last painting of Du Broil's is the most disturbing of them, and it's hard to categorize. Now we're kind of a million miles away from Haberle and Harnett. This is by no means a still life anymore. This is it's more of a political cartoon done in oils, although there is a level of detail or a level of meaning to this that we're not going to get into. Anyway, this picture is normally known as the "don't make a move," but in the original version, it was a prediction for 1900 or a warning to capitalists. So the veiled threat, or it's actually, no, it's not a veiled threat. It's an obvious threat that unless the capitalists or you capitalists change the way we do business, we're going to get money one way or the other, and this is how it's going to be done. So the recent publications say that Du Bois used himself as the model for the gunman and used his washerwoman as the model for the person taking money out of the till. If you look at the old literature, there'll be allusions to this being an anti-Semitic picture because of the bowler hat, I guess. But from the more recent things, we don't need to think that. Like I said, there's hidden meanings here. If you look at the newspaper, there's certain things that you can read that has to do with French authors and some of their work, but that's outside the scope of this talk. Okay, bringing us back to the fold, we have our last artist, John Peto. This is his self-portrait, patch self-portrait with small pictures, circa 1900. A patch self-portrait is akin to a rack picture. He was active between 1875 and 1905, and he knew Harnett personally and really respected and looked up to Harnett's work. And you can see that if you look at the bottom little picture, the small picture, that's an inkwell with a book and some other things. We saw that at the very beginning of this talk. So Peto follows the line, trompe l'oeil with $10 bill. This very much would be at home in a Harnett selection, but he also uses less detail. Harnett had some detail. Peto has less detail, and you see that in this note. You can obviously tell it's the $10 note, but he certainly doesn't have as much detail as Haberle would put into it. And we see that more clearly here in this work, the $5 bill, circa 1889. Again, we can recognize what it is, but that's about it. Now, Peter also, instead of using postage stamps, he uses ripped cards to introduce color into his work. And his color has it's unmistakable that it's kind of has a glow, almost like a pastel glow to it. So he Peter kind of gives up on detail altogether as he goes on. This is his letter rack on a black door. Again, it's a rack picture, but now he's given up any detail, or not any, but most. He's picked his colors, his shapes. We know what they are, but that's all. That's all we need to know is that these are real objects, but what's important now is their color and their position and their arrangement to form the composition of this painting. So if you take that type of approach to its logical conclusion, you have Pete Mondrian's lozenge composition. This was in 1921. The rack painting survives into the 20th century, but it does so at the cost of any detail or any connection with real objects. So what's happened is there's no room now for the work of Harnett or Haberle in abstractions such as this. What else happens? Well, in 1929, the United States goes from the large format banknote to the current small format banknote. And it also takes the dignity and the grandeur, I think, of the old $5 note and converts it completely into a utilitarian piece of paper. So the heart goes out of the subject matter. Now, does that mean that people stop painting money paintings? Well, no. The key person who kept doing this was a man named Otis Kay. And this is his painting, US Musical Notes from 1946. Kay followed into the mostly Haberle's witty, kind of joking approach to subject matter. He was a private man. He didn't exhibit, and his paintings were painted for his associates, friends, and family. So you don't see them much in public galleries. They're mostly held privately, and part of that because he was afraid of counterfeiting, allegations of counterfeiting. So that ends the story. I have a bibliography here if you want to go into this a little bit further, but that's all I have to say. I'll turn it over to Paula.
Okay, thank you so much. Would you mind stop sharing?
Okay.
So just push on that green box. Perfect. It looks like we have one comment so far. So if anybody has a question or comment, if you'll pop that in the Q&A and then I'll go through that. This one is just a compliment. Great presentation and educational. Thank you. So that's lovely. And another one saying good job. So I'm going to do my wrap up and then I'll come back and check to make sure there aren't any more questions before we finish up today. So I want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Eric Karell for a great presentation. Our Numisma Talks are being recorded and will be available once edited, and that does take about a month. We will be back tomorrow with the Power of the Penny launching Superman, and that's with our own in-house staff, Caroline Turco. So she will be with us tomorrow. Okay, let's see. Okay, a couple questions. What made these paintings popular in the 1800s?
Well, what made them popular was there was a couple of, basically I identified three reasons, but still life got away from the oranges and fruit and this type of subject matter that might look good in the dining room, but it's not appealing to people. Again, I'll say to men who have money. What are they interested in? Well, they like hunting. So if you're a hunter, you want a painting that has hunting imagery to it, whether it's a dead rabbit or, hunting horn and hat and stuff. And it's not just that. Okay, so if you're a saloon owner, and again, like I said, I want to point out that these saloons are not just dive bars. They are uh, substantial enterprises, substantial places that are known throughout the city as a place to go, and not just for anybody, but people with money. So if you want to exhibit paintings in such a saloon like that, you're not going to go to a sliced watermelon. You go to the trump the fact that it's a trick. So it gets people to talk. Now, people would talk about the moonlight marine, but that's not the kind of guy that's going to go to a saloon. Guys who are going to have a beer, they're not going to want to talk about the existential meaning of this ship on the moonlit ocean. They want to talk about, hey, how do you think the guy did that? Is that a real rabbit or is it, just a fake? Or, hey, there's a picture of a $5 bill. That's pretty cool. Is it real? That's part of it. So nowadays, if you were to put a picture of a $5 bill on a wall, nobody would care because it's just not part of as much of the popular culture as it was back then. Money was a big deal in various topics. Okay, it was a big deal because people wanted to make money. It was a big deal because there's this argument between silver certificates and gold. It's a big deal because we're being cheated because Wall Street is hogging all the money and not giving it up to us. You see what I mean? So whichever way, not all the artists reacted to the same issues. Du Breuil reacted to different issues. He reacted to the downside of things. Harnett and Haberle, with a sense of humor, for Haberle, reacted to various other aspects of the times. So, as best as I can see, and again, I'll point out that the subject matter, the large format, well engraved banknotes of the time, lent themselves to be copied. Now, again, if you were to ask me, hey, it's not so interesting to paint the current. Well, I shouldn't say to the current. I'm interested in that, but the ones like I showed you at the end of with the old-fashioned ones with Lincoln in the middle in a small. That's not so. I haven't really thought about the current. I'm not convinced about the artistic, not ability, but worth of the current U.S. paper money. I'm reserve judgment on it.
Okay.
Does that answer the question, I guess?
Yes. So, and then another question, did the election of 1896 affect local folk art?
I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
I suspect that, okay, if anything I say is just speculation. The controversy finally ended in 1900 with the passage of the Gold Standard Act, which cemented the United States into the gold standard. And after that, economic conditions started to improve. So this whole question about not having enough money kind of went away.
Okay. Do you know what the most expensive painting depicting coins or currency is? You
Oh,
don't have to know.
I don't know the answer. I came across, as I was researching for this, I think one of Harnett's paintings sold for $300,000 at an auction, but I can't remember which one it was. Which one would be the most expensive? That's hard to say because some of these things are held by museums, and so when they would come up for sale, that's iffy. The stuff that comes up for sale that's privately held, like I say, the highest I saw was 300,000.
Okay. Undoubtedly, the old large notes were definitely beautiful works of art. Is there a current movement to go back to artful US notes? Put your future hat on.
You know what? When I went to the summer seminar and studied on that engraving class, the engraver had talked about at the time, there was a study to put Harriet Tubman on the banknote instead of Jackson. But that had been shelved under the first Trump administration, and I suspect it won't come back up under the current. Other than that, there was no discussion of changing the designs of the current US notes. See, one of the things you have to consider is that we're not the only ones who use these notes. A lot of money is kept overseas in banknotes by people in countries that don't have sound currencies. So they don't want to see changes in currency design because that causes them trouble. They want to keep brand new $100 bills in their version, whatever their version of a safe deposit box is. Now, is that a major factor in American financial policy? Probably not. But this happened in India, where they just a few years ago did not demonetize their, what was a 100 rupee note, and created huge trouble. So I don't think that really answers the question, except for the fact that a change to the $20 bill has been considered, and Harriet Tubman is a contender for replacing Jackson.
And looks like last question. I appreciate the artistry with paperbacks, especially more so after your presentation. I collect coins, but I'm interested in starting to collect paper money. Can you give me a tip on how to start?
I think the way to start, and I would have been much better off if I had this experience or possibility earlier, is to learn the history behind the financial, the monetary policy of the United States between the beginning, the colonial times, and nowadays. And the second reference in the bibliography that I have, A Financial History of the United States, is a good place to start, because that's out of print, but the woman who wrote it geared it towards ordinary people to be able to understand. So she writes in a readily understandable way, and she uses actual coins and paper money to illustrate her work. So I would recommend read that book, get it. It's not, you can buy these things on thrift books or eBay, or, well, not much money, but read it, and then you'll see what part of the history appeals to you, and go from there. That's one way. So as I've gotten older, I collect much less, like, okay, this is the first one, this is the second one. Now I collect much more to tell a story. So if I see what story I want to tell, and then I go and buy those things that tell that story.
Great. All right. Well, that's some good advice. And on that note, we are going to say thank you again to everybody that was here, and thank you to Eric. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon.